Welcome to No Rares Required, episode 29, Boros Backup. One of the things I've enjoyed about March of the Machine is how many of the archetypes have different strategies or approaches that can find success. The last 4 archetypes that I haven't covered yet, I've been putting off partly because they are a little bit more limited in their approach. Boros is pretty much a straightforward aggro deck, and because of this, it doesn't have a lot of rare bombs either. The upside, in a princely set where bombs reign supreme, you can catch people off guard who are spending their first couple of turns trying to get their multicolor mana base to behave. And as I've mentioned last week in my guide to Celestia, the set has picked up in pace, and Boros definitely can pack some heat, so let's dive into the cards. My tier 1 common is Bola Slinger. You want to end the game quickly, and this has been very useful for removing their blocker, who is getting in the way. The archetype also has synergies around the backup ability, especially at Uncommon. Earlier on in the set, I favored ending at 4 drops and really trying to apply maximum pressure by dropping my land count to 15 or 16. Since the set has picked up in pace a little bit, I've started favoring 17 lands again. Either way you decide to make your curve, this is a great turn 4 play, and I want as many as I can grab in Boros. Which is great, because you can pick these up as late as turn 7 or 8, and if you aren't seeing them, you probably shouldn't be in Boros. My next tier 1 common is Aerial Boost. This is the best combat trick in the set. Being able to even just threaten the existence of this card has been useful, as I mentioned last week. Learn to bluff your spells. This one can really mess with your opponent's head. And for how good it is also available way too late into the draft. I've seen these wheel, and it is often when I see one of these on pick 9 or later that I know it's time for some white. I put Volcanic Spite at tier 1. Aggro wants cheap removal, and it doesn't get much better than Volcanic Spite. 3 damage removes most 2 and 3 drops, and being able to filter your hand helps you not stumble since this archetype cannot afford to lose tempo in the early turns. You want as many of these as you can get, and like most premium removal, it goes early, so you need to grab these when you can. My last tier 1 common is Beamtown Beatstick. The absolute most amount of equipment that you want to play is 4. And typical to Boros or Red-White, there are also equipment synergies in the archetype. The equip cost of 2 is a little pricey, but you get a treasure if it deals damage to a player, so it is sort of like an equip cost of 1 as long as your opponent doesn't have removal. One of the top uncommons, Reyav Master Smith, that we'll cover later in this guide, gives your equipped creatures double strike, which means you get 2 treasure tokens. The treasure, along with +1/+0 and menace, all for 1 cost equipment, makes this the best equipment in the set. And since the treasure token can act as a splash enabler or sacrifice fodder in Rakdos, I've seen people take this in archetypes outside of Boros, so I don't think it is the best signal, but it does tend to wheel and is a great payoff for being in Boros. Now for tier 2. Angelic Intervention is a great offensive card. As I mentioned last week, I've won my fair share of games by playing this in response to an opponent relying on Afara's Dispersal to avoid lethal damage. It can also work as unblockable damage if your opponent's board is all 1 color. Usually Aerial Boost results in better unblockable damage via flying, since multiple color boards are not uncommon, but this is still a great combat trick that I aim to have multiple copies of. It also goes late around pick 7 or 8 if white is open. Golden Scale Aeronaut I also put at tier 2. As a 5-drop, I don't recommend you pick up as many of these as you can get your hands on, but I do aim to run 2 or 3 5-drops, and they certainly can all be Golden Scale Aeronauts. This, along with Fearless Skald, another underappreciated 5-drop that I'll cover at Uncommon, is why I recommend running 17 lands even in Boros. Aeronaut wheels, so it's not difficult to fill in your top end with a couple of copies. My last tier 2 common is Marauding Dreadship. I mentioned this card in my guide to Izzet because of the synergies with Tetsuko to make it unblockable, but it is great in Boros as well, as long as you can reliably crew it the turn that it is played. Boros is about aggression, so you don't want to take a turn off to play this, but it has wonderful synergies with Hanger Scrounger, my first tier 3 common. The crew of 2 from Dreadship feels like it was designed with this card in mind. Crewing causes the creature to tap, so it is a safe way to get multiple rummages off of your Hanger Scrounger. I should also mention that the backup abilities also pair nicely with Dreadship, since making it into a 5/2 gets around the 1/1s that might be hanging around from cards like RARES Reinforcements or Preening Champion. It's a great combo at the common level, and every time that I'm red, I look to make it happen. And in Boros, you get the upside that you might have backup synergies as well. Also, both pieces of the combo often wheel. Speaking of 1/1s, I put RARES Reinforcements at tier 3. You need at least 7 or 8 1 or 2 drops, the more the merrier, to create enough pressure to make Boros really shine. And no, your 1-cost equipment doesn't count. But you know what goes nicely with equipment? A bunch of 1/1 tokens. RARES Reinforcements isn't necessary like it is in Izzet, where the card is key to enabling your early Convoke plays, but it's a great 2-drop. It also goes late around 7 or 8, so if red is open, you should be seeing them late. Now for a card that is truly only for Boros, Mirran Bane's Splitter. I put it at tier 3. I had mentioned it as a possibility in Izzet, since if you're wide enough to have an unblocked blocker, it sort of acts as a shock. But in Boros, this can be +2/+0 and double strike, as long as you have Reyav Mastersmith in play, which makes this much more than appealing. It's not as good as Beatstick, but if you have Reyav, you're going to want 3 or 4 pieces of equipment, and this card is often one of the last cards available in the pack, and is why I suggest to not stress about taking equipment very highly. Enduring Bond Warden, I put it tier 3. Similar to Celestia, this is less an actual turn 1 play, and is better if you can find synergies for it, so I don't count it towards my 1 and 2-drop count. You're often trading off your creatures as you attack into your opponent's defenses, so being able to get some of your counters back if they block is nice. Not super important, but nice. Bond Warden goes late, and I plan to pick them up on the wheel. Also available in the equipment arsenal is Core Halberd. I put it at tier 3. You only want it if you have Reyav for equipment synergies, since the archetype doesn't have much to benefit off of Vigilance except for Aerial Boost. Similar to the other equipment, you can plan on taking this on the wheel. Sigiled Sentinel, I put at tier 3. I haven't found the Vigilance to be great, and in fact, it has blocked my Rummage if you end up having to hit Hanger Scrounger with the backup, since Hanger Scrounger only activates when it's tapped. But backup has great synergies with Mirror Shield Hoplite at Uncommon, the Boros Signpost Gold card that I'll cover in the Uncommons, and a 3/3 Vigilance for 3 is still good pressure. Since it is a Knight, you might be battling for Zorius to pick these up, and I aim to pick them up around pick 6 or 7. My last tier 3 common is Kite Sail. Largely interchangeable with the other equipment outside of Beatstick that I have mentioned, giving a creature +1/+0 and flying is especially nice with double strike off of Reyav, but also if you have Fearless Skald at Uncommon as well. Just like the other equipment, it is also available on the wheel, and yet another reason to not stress about picking up enough equipment. Now for the Uncommons, and luckily Boros gets 2 Mythic level Uncommons, since it's kind of lacking in the Rare and Mythic department. My first Tier S Mythic level Uncommon is Norn's Inquisitor. We've covered this one before. It's Tier S in every white archetype. Boros doesn't have Phyrexian synergies, but Norn's Inquisitor is aggressive and allows you to attack with a 3/3 on turn 3, while also holding up Aerial Boost. I've taken it pack 1, pick 1 before, and I didn't regret it. The other mythic level uncommon, and reason why I mentioned equipment so many times at common, is Reyav Master Smith. Its restrictive mana cost means only Boros wants this card, and is a great signal that the archetype is indeed open. Because this card can simply win you the game, you want to play it when you can immediately get value off of an equipped creature, or if you have Angelic Intervention available to protect it, since your opponent will likely, and correctly, value it as a high priority target. Now for Tier 1. Similar to Aeronaut, the 5-drop at common, I don't want to run as many Fearless Skalds as I can, but I certainly don't mind 2 or 3. This card goes late for an uncommon, around pick 6 or even 7, and I think is incredibly undervalued. People have started to come up on this card, since if you can put it double strike on a menace creature or a creature with flying, it's an incredible amount of pressure. And it's a nice payoff for deciding to run 17 lands and include some 5-drops in your curve. Now for Tier 3. Stoke the Flames is best in Izzet, since the archetype has the most Convoke synergies, but since you might find yourself running Ral's Reinforcements and Boros as well, it fits into the Boros strategy. Don't forget that this can hit any target, so you can use this to pop them for 4 to the face to finish off the game once they start to slow your offensive down. As premium removal, it does go early, and as I speculated in my overview guide at the beginning of the set, I'd prefer to have Volcanic Spite. Kinner's Spellspear I put at Tier 3. This one is very matchup dependent. If you can flip this on turn 3 and use removal on turn 4, you usually win the game. Just be careful to flip this on turn 3 if your opponent has mana up. It still has prowess on the front side, so it pairs nicely with Aerial Boost and Volcanic Spite, even without flipping. It tends to go early though, and is usually gone by turn 4, so I often prioritize other cards over it. Invasion of Mercadia I put at Tier 3. It's better in Izzet because of Tetsuko synergizing with the backside, and Izzet can recover a little bit from taking turn 2 off if you must use this to smooth your early plays. Boros, on the other hand, would rather be developing the board, but sometimes the almighty shuffler god decides that wasn't in your destiny. Boros is also less interested in taking off a turn to flip this into Chiron Flamewright. It's still nice to have some sort of plan to win if they've successfully defended against your onslaught, and this can be that plan. It just shouldn't be plan A. My last Tier 3 uncommon is Mirror Shield Hoplite. Although the archetype's theme is backup, I don't aim to have a deck full of backup creatures, and outside of Bond Warden, the 1-cost backup card, most of the backup creatures are good enough on their own. Getting 2 backups instead of just 1 is still worth grabbing, and a 2/2 Vigilance wears equipment well enough. Just take advantage that this goes late for an uncommon around pick 7 or 8, and know that your deck can function without it. Now for the rares. I'm going to be skipping Boonbringer Valkyrie and Sunfall at Tier S. If you're in white, they are certainly worth running. At Tier 1, we have Voldaren Thrillseeker. I think Thrillseeker's best archetype is Gruul, since putting the backup on a big creature allows you to fling it directly at your opponent's face, but Boros is its second best archetype because the dream is triggering 2 backup 2s off of having Mirror Shield Hoplite in play on turn 2. It also works nicely to pump your double strike equipment creatures and then sack after combat for even more damage. Now I'm going to skip over a bunch of rares since they usually take me into other archetypes, but they are still great inclusions if you find yourself already in Boros and pick them up. Yorion I find best in Dimir, and blue in general because of Preening Champion, and I put it at Tier 2. At Tier 3 we have Guardian of Girapure, best in blue-white because of Preening Champion, Captain Lannery Storm, best in Gruul because of Ramp, or Rakdos because of sacrificing the treasure token, and Atali, Primal Conqueror, best in Gruul because of Ramp, and Lurrus, best in Azorius, not because of being able to companion it, but because I've found the lifelink to be very handy when racing in the air, since the Knight's archetype is very good at attacking, and less so at blocking. Zerda the Dawnwaker is worth a mention, since the only archetype I'm even thinking about running it in is Boros. And I'm sure someone like Ethan, aka Lord Tupperware, has made it a goal to trophy with each companion. I just don't recommend doing it yourself. A 3/3 that can tap to remove a problematic blocker fits well enough into the Boros strategy that I'll include it. I'm just not jumping out of my seat if I open this up. Now for the mythics. I'm going to skip over Elish Norn, Grand Cenobite. I find her best in Celestia since I tend to be a very creature-centric strategy in that archetype, as I mentioned in last week's episode. She's tier S in every white archetype, including Boros. At tier 1, we have Archangel Elspeth. All around a great white card, but best in Azorius, where, similar to Lurrus, I think you get the most payout for having the 1/1 tokens with lifelink to gum up the ground and win the race through lifelink. Chandra, Hope's Beacon, also at tier 1 in Boros. I've found her best in Izzet, since I aim to have spells that create creatures in that archetype, like Eyes of Gytaxius and Ral's Reinforcements, as well as a fair number of spells like Afara's Dispersal, Volcanic Spite, and Temporal Cleansing that you can hit off of her +1 loyalty ability. Aurelia? Aurelia, the War Leader? I always manage to open her up in pack 3 when I'm not in Boros. Her restrictive mana cost makes her only playable in Boros, or for the very, very bold splash, but a 3/4 flying Vigilance Haste that triggers an additional combat phase is exactly the kind of 6-drop that I'm looking to include in Boros. I'm going to skip over Sword of Once and Future. I also put it at tier 1, but I'll skip it since I think its best archetype is Golgari. Having both Final Flourish and Cosmic Hunger to hit as 2-cost instant removal is just such a nice payoff. At tier 2, we have Invasion of Tarkir, which I think is best in Gruul because you're more reliably looking to flip battles and take advantage of the 4/4 Flying Trampler on the backside. In Boros, you generally want to be attacking your opponent's face instead of flipping battles, so it's more or less a worse Volcanic Spite. Zurgo and Ojutai is worth a specific mention, though. You can splash off of Beatsticks, and maybe you picked up a Swift Water Cliffs somewhere along the way. Zurgo and Ojutai's home is in Boros with a splash for blue for Jeskai, and who knows, maybe you are also running Invasion of Tarkir for some dragon shenanigans. That's it for my take on Boros. Now go smork your opponents into the ground. This week, as well as next week, are going to be double episodes, so I can cover the rest of the archetypes before the release of Lord of the Rings. The next episode should be up tomorrow, and thank you for clicking like and subscribe. Good luck in your future drafts, and I will see you tomorrow.